These are violent criminals, so they're not going to go down easy.
ABC Tuesdays.
Let's get this done.
The Rookie is back.
We have 2 new rookies starting today.
Howdy.
Being a cop is stressful 24/7. Every year on the job is different.
And Training Day
We have a serial killer at large.
never ends.
We need an ambulance!
The Rookie. All new Tuesdays on ABC and stream on Hulu.
The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Cloak of Invisibility. Together they make the Deathly Hallows. Together they make one Master of Death. The last will and testament of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore.
Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living. And above all those who live without love.
Hey everyone, welcome to Hogwarts, a podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hogwarts, a podcast. We are covering Chapter 17, Bathilda's Secret. Elizabeth is with us.
Hey everyone.
And we got a very interesting, action-packed episode.
Yeah, there's a lot in this one.
A lot of things to discuss, including a couple of comments from listeners.
Okay.
So, we have our first comment from Jenny, who left a comment on our Deathly Hallows, Chapter 1, The Dark Lord Ascending.
Okay.
Jenny says, I think a deep dive into all of the Death Eaters would be really interesting. That comes from, I think our poll, I think maybe on that episode was, which Death Eaters would you want to learn more about, since there were obviously quite a few around on the table in that episode. Mm-hmm. It would be cool to find out a little bit more about Narcissa's background, or
certainly their motivations for joining Voldemort in the first
how
place.
did McNair traverse his way through the Ministry of Magic, and things like that. I think would be really, really interesting. But this next comment, I apologize if I pronounced the name incorrectly. It's either Isla, ISLA,
Okay.
who left a comment all the way back on Sorcerer's Stone.
Oh, starting off. I love it.
Chapter 4, The Keeper of the Keys.
They're going to get so excited when they eventually get to this book.
I know, it's going to be a minute, but...
Unless they binge, in which case, happy binging.
Yeah. Thank you for hopefully listening all the way to Chapter 17 of Deathly Hallows. But her comment is, it was pretty fun to hear you guys say, quote, I know it will be rebooted in our lifetime, end quote. And now I'm listening to this 5 months after the announcement came out. Yeah. Timestamps are fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've been doing this podcast for a couple of years now. And a lot of news has dropped in that time.
Yeah.
And
we've got the HBO series coming. We got Universal Studios has a new park coming.
Hogwarts Legacy dropped.
Hogwarts Legacy dropped. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there's been a lot. So thank you for going on this Harry Potter journey with us. But yeah, obviously some of our earlier episodes are definitely a timestamp.
Outdated at this point.
Thank you for listening, and thank you for commenting. Now, our last comment is from Twitter, and it is a lengthy one, so bear with me. But this is on Twitter. We posted the Deathly Hallows Chapter 14, The Thief episode, and this comment is on that posting. It's from Abigail. Abigail says, I agree with Dan about the lack of cooperation of the Order of the Phoenix and the Ministry of Magic, to be honest. I mean, if you look through any conflict in history, you'd see different groups from different sides of the conflict cooperate on certain things and on some level. Even if they bitterly hate each other, and one or both sides try to kill one another, there is still some cooperation involved between some groups because we are talking about human lives here, and about top-level interests. This is not a personal conflict between two or a few people. If we take into account that the Ministry and the Order of the Phoenix are basically on the same side, it's even weirder that there is no cooperation at all between the two. But I suppose that at the end of the day, this is a children's book, not a history book. So we'll have to let it go. No, I don't have a lot to add to Abigail's comment, because clearly we agree. I agree with you, Abigail. Thank you for the comment.
1 for Team Dan.
Yeah, not everybody disagrees with me, which is nice.
Oh, gosh.
Appreciate you, Abigail. Thank you. If you want to agree or disagree with me on anything, you are very free to do so. And we will shout you out on this podcast, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with me. And you can leave those comments on Spotify if you're listening on Spotify. You could also leave them on Twitter or Instagram or YouTube or wherever else that option is available. You can find most of our socials at HogwartsAPod. You can participate in the polls as well, which are on Spotify or on our socials when we post them there as well. And those are always fascinating to look at those results. So please engage, share the podcast wherever you can, spread it out so we can get as many comments and as many poll results and all of those opinions of you, the listener. We love listening and reading them all.
I'm very much looking forward to an eventual episode of just listener comments that we debate. So send them in.
Yep. We love doing that, so we appreciate all of that. Now, we do have a chapter to get to. Like I said, Chapter 17, Bathilda's Secret. And generally in the chapter, we left off with Harry and Hermione embracing at the Potter's grave in the graveyard in Godric's Hollow. Obviously, we transition from that to James and Lily's home. And then we get an interesting side character who comes in to this scene, and we visit their home.
I like the ominous tone in your voice. Dun dun dun.
Almost as if an action sequence is upon us. Obviously, it takes a very wild and crazy turn, and there's quite a bit of action and consequences of those actions. So, we begin with leaving the graveyard. Hermione does spot an onlooker as they're leaving the graveyard. Harry thinks, ooh, maybe it's not an onlooker. Maybe it's ghosts.
Well, I like the fact that she thinks they're being watched, and it's like, well, we just laid flowers on your parents' graves. Don't you think whoever might be watching us might think that that's a giveaway to our identities? Like, we should be cautious right now if this is an actual person and not a ghost.
But yeah, Harry thinks, like, well, what does it matter if there is somebody watching?
Yeah, because we're disguised.
We're disguised as muggles.
Right.
But then, yeah, Hermione brings up the point of, like, well, we just laid a wreath at the Potter's grave.
Yeah, if there's any type of giveaway, it's that. That whole idea of the ghosts, though, I do like that what if question that he asked, like, what if those are my parents, my ghost parents? Because he said that the history of magic said the graveyard is haunted. Though, if it were his parents, he'd know by now, right? Like, Lupin or Sirius would have known and told him about it.
There's a couple of things to that. One, he immediately jumps to ghost, one, because it's a prominent graveyard at that. So the idea that there are ghosts there are probably pretty good. But B, it being the parents, they would be bound to a site, right? So where would they be bound to? The house?
Yeah, you would think it'd be the house as opposed to the graveyard.
Because that's where they died.
Yeah.
So if there were ghosts, they wouldn't be in the graveyard. They'd probably be at the house.
Even the idea of it being haunted, though, like, that strikes me as interesting because it's like, we would know who they are if they're the ghosts, right? Like, ghosts in the wizarding world are not the same as ghosts in the muggle lore. Like, ghosts were people. You can talk to them. You can interview them. Like, a history of magic, if this place truly is haunted, they could be like, oh, yes, it is haunted by the ghost of such and such person who died this date and is important for blah, 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 blah. Like, we would know the identities of these ghosts. You wouldn't have to be like, ooh, spooky graveyard, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, and, you know, this thought comes in and out of his head fairly quickly. But if you go back to when Sirius died, you know, he tries to find Nearly Headless Nick and try to ask him about it.
Yeah, it's just that quick hope.
It's a quick hope, but the reality is most people don't choose that.
Yeah.
It's not exactly the type of life, you know, most would find appealing.
Yeah, yeah.
So
no one wants to be a shadow of themselves.
And I doubt that if Sirius didn't choose that route, I don't think James and Lily would have either.
Yeah.
Especially given the quotes that are on their
graves. I also kind of get the impression, I don't know if this is 100% true or not, but the ghosts that we have seen, I mean, like Nick in particular, he said how he feared the afterlife and he wasn't really sure, like, what's to come or whatever. So because he was so afraid of it, he chose to be a ghost. To me, that indicates a decent amount of forethought into his death. I feel like with Lily and James being only 21 years old, they weren't thinking about death, like, as something that's going to be more immediate.
Well,
they had, like, the fears, of course, of
There
Voldemort.
was very real risks that they could. That's why they were under the Fidelius.
Right, but I feel like maybe it's just my impression of James as, like, a little bit cocky of, like, we'll get through this. We're not going to die, anytime soon.
So many other friends had.
Yeah.
Like, we saw in the letter from Lily, like, oh, Wormtail's here. He looks sad. It's probably about the McKinnons.
Right.
Like, their friends are dying, and they're about the
same
same age.
Yeah, but I feel like there's a degree of living in perpetual fear of your death because this is a trying time and a dangerous time versus we just had a child and I'm with the love of my life and I'm protected under this charm that I trust my friends to keep me safe under. I feel like there's a level of cockiness of, like, I'm not going to be dying anytime soon, so I don't need to think about becoming a ghost.
Well, let me ask you this. I mentioned the quote on the Potter's grave. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the idea that, you know, the last enemy to be defeated is death. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, because I'm sure someone out there is already formulating their comment to combat us with, like, well, couldn't you say becoming a ghost would be defeating death? And I will put that out there because I will also cross genres a little bit here, cross fandoms.
Okay.
But
which fandom we going to?
We're going to Marvel.
Ooh.
Because that's my go-to. But minimal spoilers for Agatha.
Okay.
But in Agatha, we get to see a ghost.
Yes.
And we get to see Death's response to a ghost.
Yeah.
And Death does not like ghosts.
Yeah.
Death was kind of disgusted by it and like, ghosts.
Yeah, because
they
evade the powers of death.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
They kind of sidestep it.
Yeah.
So I guess for all those people that are listening and being like, hey, wait a second, wouldn't becoming a ghost actually defeat death? What would you say to that?
I would say no, because I would see becoming a ghost similar to how Nick described it as being this, like, imitation of life, as opposed to you have truly 100% died and faced death and defeated death by living in an afterlife. So I would see it as like a cheap way out, so it doesn't really count. What about you?
I agree in that it doesn't defeat death. Mm-hmm. Evades death, eludes death, but it doesn't defeat death. So I would agree in that I don't think it counts.
Okay.
But I certainly understand the question, and it's probably worth discussing.
It's just a prolonged game of hide and seek with death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can guarantee you death probably in any form or fandom probably does not like the idea of ghosts. But yeah. Anyway, so Hermione obviously gets a little unsettled by all of this and thinks, hey, we should really get a move on. Like, we should stop lingering in one spot and we should start actively searching for what we're really here to find.
Mm-hmm. Because she's still suspicious of Godric's Hollow.
As she probably should be. Mm-hmm. And she starts beginning to wonder, like, hey, wait a second. How do we even know which house is Bagshot's house? Because really, they're walking down these lanes, and they all look like, it's like a regular suburban neighborhood of, it's the same house over and over again. Like, what's to really distinguish? But Harry spots a distinguishing feature. Mm-hmm. He sees a house at the end of the lane, and he makes a beeline for it. And it's his childhood home. His very, very young childhood home. He spots James and Lily's house. It's covered in overgrown plants and snow. And he also notices that the right side of the top floor is completely blown apart.
It's kind of interesting to think that, like, this house technically belongs to Harry. You know, like, this is what he should be inheriting, this leftover ruin, which means technically he's a homeowner twice over, and he's only 17 years old. So the fact that Vernon Dursley was like, ugh, all of this is just a plot for you to get the house. He could have been like, dude, I have 2 houses. What are you talking about? I don't need your house.
Technically, you're correct. The vibe I have gotten is that the state has kind of taken
the
this
property.
House.
Yeah.
Not that it still wouldn't be Harry's, because technically I think it would be. But obviously they've made this into a sort of memorial.
Mm-hmm.
He does note that, he wonders if the reason they haven't repaired it is because it can't be repaired.
Yeah.
Like some dark magic just can't be reversed.
Yeah.
So maybe the idea of what blew that house open is so powerful and so unique that it can't be fixed.
Especially with the roof blown off. Like, we know that doesn't usually happen with a killing curse. So this was extremely dark.
Voldy's got a powerful killing curse. But yeah. But anyway, Harry doesn't exactly want to go inside the house. But he does grab the gate just so he can touch some part of the house. When he does touch the gate, a sign appears. And the sign says, on this spot, on the night of the 31st of October, 1981, Lily and James Potter lost their lives. Their son, Harry, remains the only wizard ever to have survived the killing curse. This house, invisible to Muggles, has been left in its ruined state as a monument to the Potters and as a reminder of the violence that tore apart their family. And that's not the only thing written on the sign. Mm-hmm. There are names signed onto the marker with everlasting ink. There are carved initials into the wood. And there are specific messages, like, good luck, Harry, wherever you are. If you read this, Harry, we're all behind you. And long live Harry Potter. Mm-hmm. Hermione is immediately upset that that this landmark has been vandalized.
Well, this is like writing in a book. You're not allowed to do that.
Harry, however, thinks it's brilliant and says he's glad that they did.
And it just flat out makes me cry. The whole image of it is beautiful. I love the idea that this has been left as a monument and that people have come to this location and thought about what has happened to the Potters and know that Harry is still alive and has had his life torn apart because of this. And especially nowadays, like, all those messages that you just read were the ones on top. So clearly there are people out there currently rooting for him and his success against Voldemort. It's just really, I don't know, it's bittersweet to think, like, this was where his life could have been, and his entire life could have been lived in that house, and yet at the same time it was just blown to pieces. I do wonder, though, if Sirius or Lupin ever saw all this. Like, did they come back to the house and see the monument, see the messages and the initials, or had they just not come back because it'd be too painful?
Not sure that they would have, if I'm being honest. I don't think either of them maybe needed that. Maybe when they buried Lily and James, that I'd assume would be the last time they probably ever stepped foot in Godric's Hollow. Would be my assumption. I don't know. I could be wrong about that. But, yeah, it's a heavy thing for Harry. I mean, this whole trip to Godric's Hollow so far has just been, seeing the war memorial at the center of the town square.
Seeing
and
your parents' graves.
Seeing the gravestones, and now seeing the house where it all happened.
It's just so real.
It's a lot of trauma.
Especially seeing the destruction still existing like that.
It's a lot of trauma for a 17-year-old to just be struck with.
Yeah.
And I know it's one of those things where you can always think you're prepared for that moment. Mm-hmm. You're not. You're never fully prepared for whatever emotions hit you. He probably wasn't prepared for the fact that he is in statue form now. Mm-hmm. And he also wasn't prepared for people leaving words of encouragement on such an important place to him.
Especially now when he has felt so alone and so miserable and like such a failure, to see messages of people being like, yeah, we believe in you, you got this, like that kind of stuff. Be like, oh, that's touching.
I do wonder when some of these messages were left. Mm-hmm. Do you think they were left in the immediate aftermath of the original downfall of Voldy?
No.
Or were they more recent?
I think they were more recent.
I mean, some were written in everlasting ink. But I do wonder, like, when some of this was actually written, and is some of it genuinely new, or is it a little outdated? Could it be after the events of book 5 that the stuff was written?
Yeah, I could see a little bit of that.
You know, you don't really know for sure, I suppose. But anyway, we do notice that a woman approaches.
Dun dun dun.
And it's odd that a woman, especially an older woman, as it so seems, would come out at night in the middle of the cold to stare at an old ruin of a house.
Which does tell them that she's at least a witch, because it did say that this house is hidden to muggles. So if she's staring at it, clearly magical abilities. But like you said, there's absolutely no reason for her to be out here looking directly at them next to the house.
She seems to know that they are there, and she seems to at least have a vague sense of who they are. Despite Harry and Hermione being under an invisibility cloak at the time. And
Polyjuice Potion.
With Polyjuice Potion. We'll get back to that a little later. But she beckons, and Harry just flat out asks, "Are you Bathilda?" Mm-hmm. She nods. Mm-hmm. She leads the way to a house that's nearly as overgrown as the Potter house. Which I feel like should be a little bit of a like, okay?
I don't know. I feel like sometimes elderly people don't necessarily take care as well with their gardens and lawns because it's harder.
Shouldn't someone else help out there?
I mean, I know she has...
Also, she's famous.
She's magical, but perhaps it's just like, whatever. I'll just... Maybe she's like the Weasleys.
She's magical, she's famous.
Maybe she's like the Weasleys where she's like, overgrown gardens are the best.
Every other house seems to be fairly well manicured. It's these two that stick out.
Yeah.
It's a little odd.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. But anyway, we get into her house. Mm-hmm. Harry notes that either she or the house, or both, smells really bad.
Yeah. And her description of her body is not fantastic either. Like, this is an old person.
Well, he notes the smell specifically as a combination of these scents. Bear with me. Old age, stale food, dust, unwashed clothes, mildew, and the most extensive, meat gone bad.
Yeah, not great.
No, that's pretty disgusting.
Yeah. So that's the smell.
More alarm bells should be going off at this point.
Yeah, but again, you could also try to push it aside as like, I mean, you think about walking into like a nursing home, there's a very distinct smell to those types of places, or sometimes houses of the elderly where they're not able to clean either the house or themselves as well. It has a smell.
Again, you'd think with her being relatively famous, someone would be checking in on her at some point.
I hope so, but I don't know. She's certainly a vision herself. The description he gave was like her knuckles are blue and mottled, her eyes are thick with cataracts, and they're sunken into her transparent skin. Her face is covered in broken veins and liver spots, and she has what remains is just white hairs on her head. Like, very, very, very old.
Harry does also notice that the locket that he is wearing, remember, he's still wearing Slytherin's locket.
Which is still so stupid. I don't know why he's doing it, but yes.
Harry notices that the locket has seemingly awakened and is pulsing through the cold gold on his chest.
Almost like it's alive or something.
So, he does note that, look, Bathilda might be a little past her prime. And notes that, hey, she's clearly unable to use magic because she's trying to light candles by hand.
Which she's barely able to do. Harry has to do it for her.
Mm-hmm. And he also, while doing that, notices that several photos are missing from a very large frame and thinks, oh, this is probably from Rita. Rita probably stole these photos to put in the book. Mm-hmm. Which I feel like is a fairly safe assumption. I feel like it's pretty safe. Uh-huh. So, while looking at some of the photographs, he spots the same thief that he saw in Voldy's mind. And he asks about the person. As he turns to Bathilda to ask about the person, and she looks up at him, the locket begins to beat faster.
Which, so far, he's been just assuming the locket is reacting to Godric Gryffindor's sword. The assumption being Dumbledore left it here, so it knows, the Horcrux knows that its end is nearing more and more closely. But he did say at one point that the locket throbbed so, deeply that it even moved his sweater. It just, thumped out of his chest. This thing is clearly active right now.
Mm-hmm. He does end up pocketing the picture. He tries to swiftly steal the picture.
Which, question, isn't this picture already in Rita's book?
No. This particular picture is not.
Okay.
There's a picture of this teenager with Dumbledore.
Okay.
But this particular, I think this is a solo shot of the kid. But anyway, Bathilda doesn't really answer Harry. Decides just to beckon him upstairs. And when Hermione tries to join Harry in going upstairs, Bathilda's like, no. Just Harry. Non-verbally, I should.
No, everything is she points to herself, she points to Harry, she points to the upstairs. It's like a big game of charades or something.
Yeah. All non-verbal, more just gesture-based language.
The only time she did say come when she was around the corner in, I think, the hallway or whatever, which Harry reacted to. Hermione not so much. Hermione is mostly focused on how this is all off. This is a very, it's giving her this uneasy feeling of something is not right here. And Harry keeps trying to put her at ease and be like, oh, it's fine. Dumbledore clearly gave her the sword. Maybe she's just old and stuff. He desperately wants an answer because they've gone way too long without some type of success here. So I think that's part of it.
And we're beginning to go too long on this part 1 of our episode. So we're going to actually pause here and take a little break, and then we'll be back with part 2 of this episode, which features some interesting action sequences. So we'll take a little pause, get to our break sound, and we will be right back. Before we get to our break sound, I'd like to acknowledge our friend Andy, who helps us produce our intros and our break sounds. If you want to hear more of Andy's work and like Formula One racing, check out the Outlap F1 podcast. It's your one-stop shop for Formula One news, insights, race previews, and reviews. You can find them wherever you listen to podcasts, and they even have a YouTube page. So check out Andy, Cody, John, James, and Deanna, and join them on the Outlap.
Still getting around to that fix on your car? You got this. On eBay, you'll find millions of parts, guaranteed to fit. Doesn't matter if it's a major engine repair or your first time swapping your windshield wipers. eBay has that part you need, ready to click perfectly into place. For changes big and small. Loud or quiet. Find all the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. But you already know that. eBay. Things, people, love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Dobby has no master. Dobby is a free elf.
All right, so we are back from break, and we're picking up right where we left off with Bathilda bringing Harry to the upstairs alone. Just them two, as Hermione hangs back. Mm-hmm. And Harry notes that as he enters this room, that it's pitch black. Mm-hmm. There's no light, no anything. And
Still smells horrible.
Bathilda closes the door behind them, which then really makes it pitch black.
Mm-hmm.
And in the darkness, Bathilda closes in on Harry with stunning speed. He turns around and she is right there.
Mm-hmm.
Right there. And she asks him if he's actually Potter.
Which he confirms.
He confirms. He still asks if she has anything for him. He's on point. He's trying to get the job done. He's like, wait, do you have anything for me?
Well, especially because you're in the darkness right now. Like, this is weird. Let's get on with it.
Yeah, but as he's asking her if she has anything, pointing to the sword, he's asking about the sword.
Mm-hmm.
Harry's scar pricks. He hears Voldy's voice. Hold him.
Mm-hmm.
The locket jumps.
So much that the sweater moves.
So much that the sweater that he's wearing actually moves.
And the dark room, he said, dissolved momentarily.
Yeah, so hearing Voldy's voice, it's like he almost like flits into his mind and flits out.
Yeah. And he feels his joy, because Voldemort has a sudden rush of just like, yes.
Yeah. So the locket jumps. She directs him to a corner in which he assumes he's going to be searching for the sword. Like it's just hidden under a bunch of old clothes or whatever have you.
I'm going to give Harry some credit, though, with this. He did say he is holding his wand the entire time, and he keeps an eye on Bathilda. Something is weird here, and I don't know what just happened with hearing Voldemort's voice and, like, my scar hurting. So something's up. I'm not going to take my eye off her. But he does at one point, and then that is when everything shifts.
Yeah, so he actually, like, backs himself up into the corner that she directs him to with keeping his eye on Bathilda. But yeah, he does glance down at the pile that he's supposed to be searching through, and at that moment...
Horror movie.
The old body of Bathilda Bagshot collapses, and a great snake pours out from where her neck had been.
Nagini's here.
The snake strikes, biting his wand arm, sending the wand towards the ceiling. The snake then strikes Harry again, this time with the tail, which strikes him like right across the midsection, knocking out a lot of just the wind from him.
I'm pretty sure it then broke a table, too.
And begins coiling around Harry.
Mm-hmm.
Hermione ends up being like, I don't think something's very right about this.
I hear random noises. That doesn't sound like you're getting a sword.
She joins the fight, hits the snake with a spell, frees Harry, and then Harry describes, just to get an image of how large this snake is, and I get this might not be the biggest room of all rooms, but he says the room was full of snake.
Yeah. Nagini's a big girl.
I don't care what room you happen to be in. If a room is full of snake, that's a large snake. It's a very large, very intimidating snake.
And Nagini is also hissing, obviously, in parcel tongue, like, yes, hold him, like, yes, Potter, like all, which, of course, Harry is now finally putting two and two together of like, oh, this is why she didn't want to talk around Hermione. It's snake language.
Which I think is clever that they had a Bagshot / snake not actually verbally speak.
Yeah.
Until this point.
Yeah.
Because that obviously would have been a giveaway. At least Hermione had been like, hey, wait a second.
What's with all the hissing?
Why can't I understand you? But Harry informs Hermione at this point in time that he's coming. He
keeps switching between his perspective and Voldemort's, which must be so, like...
disorienting.
Yeah, especially that moment. If you're trying to keep yourself safe, you want to keep your senses about you, and switching to your enemies is just... oh, that's rough.
So there's a scuffle that obviously happens in this room where Harry's starting to panic a little bit, and he's like, I'm fighting a massive snake that's probably... because he's still got the mind like, wait, this is probably a Horcrux. There's not a whole lot of stuff we can do to this snake. If it's Nagini, which you can assume probably Nagini, who they think is
a Horcrux.
Right. So there's not a whole lot you can really do to this snake at the current time, at least that they know of, or that they're prepared for, given this panicked, rushed situation. Now he's put Hermione in danger, and Hermione's the only one he's got left at this point, so he's like, how do we do this? So a scuffle ensues. He ends up grabbing Hermione. Hermione fires Confringo into the room, exploding furniture, and the spell itself rebounds around the room. And this is such an action movie moment. This is his James Bond moment. He grabs Hermione, leaps out of a broken window. Remember now, they're upstairs.
Yeah,
they're
second floor.
upstairs.
Second floor.
He leaps out of a broken window and twists in midair.
And they disapparate. Thus, Voldy arrives shortly thereafter and sees them disapparate. Harry can see this through Voldy's point of view. Mm-hmm. He sees himself disapparate. Mm-hmm. And Voldy is left standing in the room. Keep in mind we have, at this point in time, where we just left it, with Voldy standing in the room, we have 3 parts of Voldy's soul in the room at one time. With Voldemort, the Horcrux, and Nagini.
Right. Voldy himself, the locket around Harry's neck, and, again, presuming Nagini is a Horcrux, Nagini. So he'd have 3 in the room at the time we have paused.
It just strikes me as interesting that the Horcrux reacted so excitedly to another piece of Voldemort's soul. I don't know if it's excited because it's recognizes it as a bit of itself and almost like a brother, like a reunion, or if there's the thought like the two can join together and become a stronger Horcrux or something. Like, do they merge with each other?
I just got this.
It's just interesting to think like there's never been another period. There's never been another moment of somebody having multiple Horcruxes interacting with themselves, like
in such a small space.
But even in general, like if anyone who's done a Horcrux has only done one, so the idea of like what could
being in the same vicinity,
what would they do to each other is really interesting to see them reacting so strongly to each other's presence.
They're clearly recognizing each other, but I just got this image of the piece of Voldemort's soul in the locket, in Slytherin's locket with an ornate S.
Merging with Nagini.
Recognizing, hey, there's another part of my soul in this room. It's in a snake? Yay!
I want to see a picture of Nagini wearing Slytherin's locket. The true Slytherin is the snake.
Could Slytherin have been more proud?
Just get her the ring, too, and it's all good.
Hey, bro, you're in a snake. That's super cool. What? No, you're cooler. You're in Slytherin's locket. I could just see the 2 pieces of soul just being like, hey, man.
Conversing with each other.
You're pretty cool. You're in a pretty cool spot.
It's just such an interesting reaction that it struck me that they recognize each other even though they're independent from each other.
That moment that Bathilda / the snake Nagini looks up into Harry when he's asking her that question, and then the locket's just like, boom.
Right. It just makes you wonder, like, what was it attempting to do? Like, it again reminds me of Lord of the Rings, where the ring is kind of an independent entity and wants to, lead people astray from its own destruction. Here, it almost seemed like it wanted to.
Does it indicate the idea that it jumps and like actually leaves Harry's skin for a second?
It seems like it wants to join its brother.
That's what I'm saying. Like, do you think it actually wants to reunite? Like, the innate intention of the soul is it wants to be whole and together.
Possibly. Which begs other questions then, too. Because, Hermione said that one textbook said the only way that the Horcruxes could be reunited, the soul could be reunited, is if you feel remorse for it. But of course, that's only talking about one Horcrux. The idea of multiple being merged together again, that hasn't been explored before.
So while we're on this topic, I'll throw in another question.
Okay.
And do you think that's also the reason that Bagshot / the snake / Nagini was able to actually see through the invisibility cloak and see through the Polyjuice potion because it's recognized
the Horcrux?
The Horcrux.
It could be a factor of it.
Because otherwise, why would it be able to?
She's not the first creature who's ever seemed to look through an invisibility cloak. Like, Mrs. Norris has seemed to see Harry through the cloak before, back when he was like wandering the hallways and Snape and Filch almost caught him. So I feel like animals, at least specifically cats, have been able to look through it. So it would make sense for a snake to also to be able to see through the invisibility cloak. In theory, knowing that she watched them.
I just thought about it. Heat signatures. How does a snake actually hunt prey? Heat signatures.
That could also be a factor.
It could notice, like, hey, wait, there's a whole bunch of warmth in this area. I might not be able to see it, but there's warmth there. You know what I mean?
That could be a whole other thing.
That could be.
Invisibility cloak might just be the visible spectrum, not necessarily like heat or other rays of light.
Yeah.
There is also the fact that they just laid the roses on the graves, so she's been watching, and Nagini's an intelligent snake to put 2 and 2 and 2 together and come up with, that's Harry Potter.
Well, I wonder if there were magical triggers. And we'll get into Harry and Hermione's analysis of this, because they do break it down later and try to figure this all out. So we'll get into that later. But yeah, there's certainly some higher levels of magic at play. But speaking of higher levels of magic, we get one, Voldy, standing in the now ruin of Bagshot's house. And Harry and Voldy are still in the same mind. They're still flitting between each other's thoughts and feelings and emotions. So Harry is getting a sense here of what Voldy is seeing.
I love this transition so much. It's a little bit longer of a quote, but he's thinking to himself, he's like, here within sight of that house where he had come so close to knowing what it was to die, the pain was so terrible, ripped from his body. But if he had no body, why did his head hurt so much or so badly? If he was dead, how could he feel so unbearably? Didn't pain seize with death? Didn't it go?
It's an interesting transition into, you have Harry's point of view, and then you mix it together as Harry and Voldy are merged together. That connection that they have.
Yeah.
And it kind of starts with Harry, and then it merges and melts together, and then you come out the other side as
Voldemort.
As Voldy. And Voldy recounts the night of one Halloween 1981. And he's walking through the town. He sees a child. He sees many children and parents and all kinds of people walking around as it's, again, Halloween.
I love how the kid's like, nice costume, sir. And then he gets closer and he's like, oh, you're scary. And he runs away.
So, but it's interesting, though. Voldy sees this and he's like, he sees this child. He contemplates murder.
Yeah.
He has his hand on his wand underneath his robes and he's like, I could.
But what I find is more interesting is the fact that he's like, that'd be unnecessary.
Right. That's the interesting part. He contemplates murder and is like, I don't have to.
Yeah.
I don't need to.
Yeah.
So I'll just keep going.
I feel like maybe I'm wrong, but by this point, especially this night, he was kind of thinking like, I want my kills to be deliberate, and some random muggle child is not
He's here
important
for a purpose.
enough.
He's definitely here for a clear purpose.
Yeah.
So let me set the scene. So we have, as he approaches the Potter house, he sees James entertaining Harry with colored puffs of smoke from his wand.
Which is so cute.
Lily takes Harry to bed. And James just lazily, puts his wand on the sofa. As he puts his wand on the sofa as Voldy is entering the home.
The entire time Voldemort can see this because they don't even have their curtains drawn.
No, they assume the charm is still up.
You fool. Like, look at you putting your wand aside as if you have nothing to fear. Like, ha! Idiots.
Yeah, so James puts his wand down just as Voldy is entering the home. James notices the new entrant to the house and screams, Lily, take Harry and go. It's him. Go, run, I'll hold him off. To which Voldy's like, really? You're going to hold me off? You don't even have your wand. And obviously the killing curse comes in, and James falls like a marionette whose strings were cut. What a vivid imagery that provides.
It just shows you how sudden it is.
So Voldy makes his way up to the bedroom where Lily is attempting to barricade herself and Harry in because She also does not currently have her wand on her. Mm-hmm. She puts Harry in the crib behind her, and throws her arms out wide, saying, not Harry, please not Harry.
Yeah, kill me instead.
I also find it interesting. We talked about, just talked about how he looked at this child and was like, I could kill this child. Mm-hmm. It's unnecessary. Mm-hmm. I don't have to do it. Here, he gives Lily 3 warnings.
Yeah.
3 times. He's like, you don't have to die. You can leave, and I won't harm you. 3 times. Mm-hmm. And he also notes he could have pushed her away. He could have gotten her out of the way. But it seemed more prudent to finish them all. And then after Lily does perish, Harry then begins to cry after realizing it is not, in fact, James in a costume. It is this terrifying image.
He has no nose.
I'm sure that's what Harry was thinking. Wait a second. But then, Voldy becomes nothing.
Mm-hmm. The whole world fell apart.
Nothing but pain and terror, which I think is an interesting way to describe Voldy. Mm-hmm. The idea of him feeling terror, I think, is an interesting
I think it's another image of him merging back into Harry, like her way of transitioning from this Voldemort memory back into Harry, because he right now is full of terror and pain.
The imagery of the transition from Harry to Voldy is great. Mm-hmm. Transition from Voldy truly feeling pain and terror, and maybe terror for like the first time ever in his existence, when the spell rebounded and all of a sudden it's nothingness. Mm-hmm. Like he's like, wait, this shouldn't have happened. Why am I feeling all of these intense things? Mm-hmm. This is not how I expected any of this to go. Then transitions back into Harry being like, this is not how I expected any of this to go. Why am I feeling these things?
Godric's really Hollow was not supposed to go that poorly.
Right.
Before we move on, though, with that, the whole bit of her being given the chance 3 times to move aside, we know the fact that she didn't move aside and died protecting Harry is what caused the whole rebounding of the killing curse and that protection of Harry.
Yeah.
I wonder if it was strengthened by how many times she had to deny moving.
Oh, you think it was like tripled the power?
Maybe. Because, I mean, like...
Maybe.
I could see it as... I mean, we saw... a few chapters ago, that one woman who protected her kids when Voldemort came to the house, and there was a thought, maybe she's a witch, maybe she's not a witch, but it was just like one quick instant. Here, if Voldemort is giving you the out and you're choosing not to step away, and even his initial intention is not necessarily to kill you, that denial 3 times, and 3 seems to be a magical number, in general, if that strengthened the protection, and that's why the rebound was powerful enough to blast the roof off.
I still say his just original spell is probably enough to blast the roof off. But no, I could buy that idea of him saying 3 times, get out of the way, and her not doing it 3 times is 3 times over that spell, that protection charm. I could buy that. Mm. My thought process with this went a different direction. He gave Lily 3 chances to get out. Mm-hmm. He didn't give James any chances.
No, he didn't.
Why did he feel it was necessary to kill the father so swiftly, but potentially save the mother? Was it because his father bailed and his mother tried?
I could definitely see that.
You know what I'm saying?
I could buy that 100%.
Where he felt no empathy towards the father.
Yeah.
But he was like, you're a mother, you're trying, I'll give you a chance.
Which is also interesting then, because, I mean, for Voldemort's father, he was the one who was the muggle. Lily would technically be the muggle born in this situation, and James would be the wizard.
The pureblood, yeah.
Yeah. But that is definitely an interesting parallel. I could 100% buy it.
I mean, that's where my mind went to, is like, it's interesting that he gave Lily the chance and he just trucked James.
Yeah. Seeing that mother's love that he never got to experience.
Or it could be sexist in that he doesn't consider Lily a threat, but considered James a threat.
Also a possibility. I'm not going to say that Voldemort is above sexism.
Let us know which route you're going to go on that. Could be a combo platter.
Yeah,
who knows?
Yeah, all the above.
Could be all of the above. We're not done with Voldy just yet. Because he does come out of this kind of remembrance and this kind of reflective state that he's in, being like, oh, just over there was where my first demise was, and it's right here where I almost got my payback.
Yeah.
He comes out of that, he looks down, and he's like, hey, wait a second. I know that guy. And he finds the picture that fell out of Harry's pocket of the thief in Gregorovich's window. And again, he feels, in his disappointment of not getting Harry, he's like, I just missed him again.
At least this was worth it. I found what I wanted.
Now it turns into, hey, wait a second. I got a big win here. I have
very gleeful.
I have a new path forward.
I gotta say that whole scene with Voldemort, especially his memory, I find it fascinating. It reminds me of the bits of book 6 that I love so much, of seeing his memories, but being able to see it from his perspective, it in a way, and this is going to sound a little weird, but it kind of humanizes him. Because you think of him this entire time as such a villain, and sometimes when people are seen as villains, they become larger than life. But seeing him walking around on Halloween and seeing him, like, potentially let Lily live, and his thoughts of, like, oh, these fools, it just makes him seem more like Tom Riddle than Voldemort.
Well, there's a whole... I know everybody wants us to have this debate, because it's been mentioned a couple of times from listeners, about we have the debate of who's the better villain, Umbridge or Voldy. And I think it is a debate to have, because they each have, obviously, their evil resumes, if you will. But I think that is well worth having the debate about in the future. We might even dedicate an episode to it. Who knows? But anyway, we return to Harry and Hermione. And Harry realizes that he is actually back in the tent.
And Hermione's in quite the state.
Hermione has tended to Harry for hours after leaving the house. She set up the tent, she set up the protection spells, she set up everything. And she says that Harry had been shouting, moaning, and things. And Harry's like, oh no. What did I do? What did I say?
I just imagine, like, The Exorcist. Like, him just in bed, just being possessed and just screaming curse words and moaning and just, like...
Well, he thought he was crying like the baby. Like, crying like him in the crib.
Yeah.
Which would be, I'm sure, very upsetting to Hermione watching...
Any of it would be horrifying. I mean, she said she did her best. She had to use a hover charm to get him into bed because he was so heavy, and... she said the Horcrux, she did her best to take it off, which I think is a very smart move on her part.
But she struggled. She couldn't just take it off.
No.
She had to actually, like, use a spell to sever the chain off.
And she apologized. I mean, like, another scar for Harry Potter.
Which does note that the chain can obviously be destroyed, but the
locket
literal
itself.
Locket itself cannot.
Yeah. She cleaned Nagini's bite and healed it as best she could with Dittany. So she's clearly been busy, but I can just imagine, like, if Harry was acting like the Exorcist and possessed and just screaming at her the entire time and screaming very upsetting things, or even recounting his parents' deaths, like, from Voldemort's perspective, all of that must be horrifying.
He also notes that he now has a large scarlet oval over his heart where the locket burned him.
Yeah, another scar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is now, the locket has now marked him. I don't know that that's permanent per se, but it's still a gleaming reminder of, hey, this locket's a really dangerous thing. Just FYI. So Harry then apologizes for ever going to Godric's Hollow. He's like, this was a big mistake.
You were right. Bad idea.
Yeah. And Hermione, to her credit, goes, well, now, wait a second. I thought this was the correct place to go to. And clearly, I still, me, the host of this podcast, still thinks it was a correct place to go because there was a Horcrux there. There was a snake.
I mean, they were both right. Like, there was a lot of information at Godric's Hollow. We got a glimpse of the thief from the picture. We got to see the symbol on another grave. We got to see stuff that would amplify Harry's confidence with seeing his the monument and the house and his parents' graves are important. But Hermione was also right. It was a trap. It was dangerous. Thankfully, they weren't dark, like Death Eaters hanging around. But Voldemort did show up, so a risk. I would say worth it, but still big risk.
Well, Harry notes it would have been worth it had they actually killed the snake.
There's no way they were going to do that, though. That snake
Not
was
caught off
wrapping
guard.
around them.
If they had thought, hey, wait a second, what if?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is another instance like they were going into the Ministry, and granted, this is more of a long shot what if.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, what if we happen to run into the snake? And we got to have a plan for that. I get it's a little bit of a long shot compared to the Ministry, where it's like, what are the odds we get split up? Pretty good. The odds you get split up at the Ministry are pretty darn good. Here, it's a pretty, it's a long shot that you happen to run into a Horcrux, much less it be the one that's sentient, that can actually, move and do things. But Harry's like, if we had been able to kill the snake, it would have been way worth the risk. Mm-hmm. Which, I agree, it would have been worth the risk. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Harry tells Hermione all that happened with the snake, which horrifies Hermione. And Harry notes, hey, Lupin said that there would be magic that we never imagined.
Yeah. I mean, clearly Bathilda died, or was probably more likely killed decently long time ago to be able to be this rotten and reanimated by dark magic.
To Harry's point, this is what Lupin was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, you think you know magic. I think, Remus Lupin, I think I know magic.
Yeah.
We don't know anything.
Yeah.
Because what he is capable of...
And his imagination for darkness is beyond our own. Who would think of doing this?
Just this is an extraordinary example of what Voldy can do.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't even think this was particularly difficult for him. Creative,
mm-hmm.
but I don't think it was particularly difficult for him. And, I know we talked about possible ways that the snake knew Harry and Hermione were there and who they were and where they were and whatever. What if he did put a charm on the whole of Godric's Hollow, where it's like, if this person should enter, Nagini's alerted?
Yeah.
What if something is put at the Potter's grave? Nagini's alerted.
Yeah.
What if Harry Potter should arrive at the Potter's house? Voldy's so imaginative and proficient with what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But this is another example of oh no, there's adult magic at play here that you've never experienced before. The Order of the Phoenix has never experienced before. The Ministry of Magic hasn't experienced before. And his other Death Eaters are this is how they got enamored by him, is seeing these extraordinary feats of magic that they're like, we don't even know where he came up with that, let alone how he does it. So Harry's like, okay, well, you need sleep because, no offense, but you look atrocious.
Yeah.
So just, where's my wand at? I'm going to go take the watch while you sleep. And Hermione's like, about that. Harry, it's my fault. But that curse or the spell that I used rebounded. And I think when it rebounded, I think it might have hit your wand. And your wand is kind of, sort of, maybe-ish broken a little bit, maybe?
It's being held together just by the single strand of the phoenix feather.
Yeah.
It gives me vibes of when his Nimbus 2000 broke.
Kinda, yeah. Not as soul-crushing, but...
No, this is way worse.
This is way worse. Hermione tries repairing it, but basically, two very simple spells end up snapping it again.
Can't do Expelliarmus anymore.
Nope. However, I will grant him this. His version of Expelliarmus might not be a simple spell. Maybe his has got a little bit more impact to it.
Possibly.
But anyway, Harry feels empty inside. So Hermione says, remember when Ron had his wand destroyed, and he couldn't repair it either. He had to get a new one. Well, Harry immediately cuts to, Ollivander's captured. Gregorovitch is dead. I have no other options to get a new wand.
Yeah.
This is it. Or nothing.
Yeah.
And Harry's like, okay, fine. Give me your wand. I'll go do this watch with yours instead. And he left her.
Crying. She's crying.
Desiring nothing more than to get away from her.
Yeah, which I feel like that is a mixed amount of emotions. I mean, there's guilt about what just happened. It's kind of his fault that they got put into the situation for his wand to be broken like that. There's the anger at his wand being broken because, like, I need this. There's now fear, too, of, like, well, shoot, now what do I do? How am I supposed to defeat Voldemort if my wand doesn't work? Like, that's my weapon, and I don't have it anymore.
Well, remember, he put a lot of stake in that wand.
Because of Phoenix Feather.
Because of their shared cores and the fact that it acted upon its own accord during the Seven Potters scene and saved his life. So he's putting a lot of emphasis on this wand is crucial
and special
to me surviving this. Mm-hmm. And now you're telling me that it's not a factor anymore.
It just basically reads like, you're dead. Good luck.
So I have a question to wrap up this episode.
Okay.
The question is very straightforward. Do you think Ron being present for any of this would have changed any of the outcome? And how so?
I feel like Ron would have vocalized better than Hermione the fact that this was not a good situation. I feel like he would have been very vocal about the fact that the house smelled bad. And, like, don't you think it's weird that this tiny woman is not speaking to us? Hermione, I think, does her best to stay polite. And this might be one of the occasions where Ron's bluntness would actually help them. I don't know if they would have achieved the Matrix action shot of disapparating out the window if Ron had been there, so that would have been really unfortunate. I don't know if he would have overcomplicated things or gotten them out faster, but I think he definitely would have been more rudely blunt about how this is a weird situation and I don't like this.
I think one of Ron's, and as brutal as that was to Ron a couple of chapters ago, I think Ron's greatest asset to the trio is he is very common sense. Mm-hmm. He's like, because I think Harry sometimes gets caught up in the grandeur and Hermione's thinking like 15 steps ahead. Mm-hmm. Ron is like, wait a second, guys.
This right here is weird.
Yeah, practically speaking, this is stupid.
Yeah.
Or this is dangerous. Or, hey, we need to rethink this. Mm-hmm. Hey, let's stop. Like, what are we doing? And sometimes Ron gets caught up in Harry and Hermione being like, well, if it's Harry Potter, he's got to be right. Oh, if it's Hermione, she's got to be right. And that's what the Ministry of Magic was. But sometimes Ron speaks up and he's like, hey, wait a second. Things aren't exactly right here. This is weird. This isn't good. Like, we need to stop for a second. So, yeah, I do think that would have changed. And you never know. Maybe, you know, he just is talking to Hermione in the downstairs, and maybe they don't come up and save Harry, and maybe that's a problem. Or maybe they
I could see Hermione being like, we have to stay downstairs because she said she just wants to talk to Harry, and Ron being like, that's stupid. I'm going to sneak upstairs and see what's going on.
Maybe they could distract each other downstairs, and then all that stuff happens upstairs, and they're still downstairs distracting each other. Or Ron does convince Hermione to be like, what are we doing down here? At the very least,
I see Ron is sneaking up and Hermione being like, don't go up there. She didn't invite you up there. And be like, no, I'm going up there. I'm going to see what's going on.
Ron would at least be at the door with one of those extendable ears underneath.
Yes, and be like, hey, there's a lot of hissing going on.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week. Thank you for listening to Hogwarts, a podcast. If you like what you've heard, please click the subscribe button on your preferred podcasting app and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at HogwartsAPod.